So ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Andrew Wilson.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Can everybody hear? I have a mic.
Yes.
Carrying well? And no pressure, eh? Let's wrap this up. So this is going to be a fairly conventional lecture as well. I'm not going to wander, and that's going to make the videographer's job easier, and maybe make your job easier in following what I'm presenting here as the sixth and final speaker in this extraordinary tree lecture series. So I get the dubious task, perhaps, or the honor of concluding this story, which you've heard in 5 chapters thus far. Chapter 1, Heritage Tree Advisor Barbara Heidenreich described Ontario's physical planning and policy environment within which we may seek to protect trees. A lovely photo of a favorite or extraordinary tree with an experiential narrative does serve to document a tree's significance. However, our policy world asks for more objectivity to substantiate a claim of significance leading to protection. For example, basic biological information such as tree species, height, form, age, and rarity. Regardless of trees' biological significance, Heidenreich asserts correctly that every tree has cultural significance and cultural value because the current existence of any tree is in some way indicative of our activity or thinking and thus our history. Leaving a tree alone, for example, may be an aesthetic choice for some, as would be cutting it as firewood for others. Though not an Ontario tree, consider Big Lonely Doug. This West Coast Douglas fir is famous for its unique biological characteristics, made all the more remarkable because the tree was not cut down for lumber, despite its cultural or economic value as such. Perhaps Professor of Biology Robert Bailey, as with his Chapter 2 story of glaciation, tree migration, and ecology resulting in the grey Bruce forests, could shed some light on Big Lonely Doug's ancient life. As might German forester Peter Verleben, who in his book, The Hidden Life of Trees, writes of the ways that he believes trees communicate between themselves and other species. The name Big Lonely Doug may be more descriptive than is physically obvious. The implications of Verleben's and Bailey's ecological findings are significant, given how we may think of and use trees as singular elements, and they would be familiar to and respected by First Nation author Lenore Kishig, who presented Chapter 3 in this story of the extraordinary tree. Her people have always known and celebrated the being of trees, their stories and importance within the life web of which we are all a part. Local environmentalist and historian John Harrison, the Chapter 4 speaker, told us of grey Bruce industrialists' relationship with the extensive forests they harvested to drive the local economy. Trees are still being harvested regularly in the area, though selectively, rather than through clear-cutting. We have enlightened legislation, such as the Niagara Escarpment Plan, to thank for that. Established in 1973, the Niagara Escarpment Plan was notable for its large-scale ecosystem approach to physical planning. Penultimate Chapter 5 speaker, EcoHealth Ontario advocate Karen Morrison, made clear the correlation between healthy ecosystems and healthy humans, and argued for public health policymakers and practitioners attending to the ecological quality of the places we live because of the associated human health benefits. While the public health field may be deficient in this regard, as she suggested to us, many involved in the design and planning of public space are not. The first self-identified landscape architect and co-designer of New York's Central Park, Frederick Law Olmsted, was motivated in his work by his conviction that parks were an essential natural foil to the negative aspects of 19th century cities for human well-being. This was further expressed in England at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century in the garden suburb and garden city movements. In 1969, landscape architect Ian McHarg, influenced by his early life in industrial Glasgow, and no doubt Rachel Carson's 1961 publication Silent Spring, advocated design with nature in his book of the same name. In 1984, landscape architect Anne Whiston Spearn reinforced the ecological reality of human settlements in her book, The Granite Garden. Here in the 21st century, landscape architect Randolph Hester designs for ecological democracy, characterized by 15 physical design principles such as sacredness, connectedness, pacing, sensible status seeking, and diversity, all of which relate to individuals' health and well-being and that of the places they inhabit. Closer to home, UBC Urban Design Program Head and landscape architect Patrick Condon, reinforcing Olmsted's, McHarg's, Spearn's, and Hester's ideas, among others, includes the creation of a linked system of natural areas and parks as one of the 7 rules for sustainable communities. Again, because of the environmental and thus health benefits for us and local ecosystems. There should be no question that our health and well-being and that of all life is connected directly to environmental quality. The Extraordinary Tree Lecture Series has focused on trees as extraordinary organisms within the greater whole of our country, of our counties, and provincial landscapes. Trees are the largest and oldest living things in our lives. Grey Bruce counties have no giant Douglas firs, but they do have ancient eastern white cedars. Trees are critical to life on Earth as we know it, and require it to be for our own survival. Anishinaabe peoples and cultures have revered trees, and we recall this in our scientific age in calling a cedar arborvitae, or tree of life. The role of trees in our history is mixed ecologically and culturally. Rather than an acknowledgement of their ecological role, tree of life could pertain to the 19th and early 20th century lumber industry, upon which the economy of Grey Bruce was built. The destruction of so much forest would have been a profound assault on the local ecology as well as the lives and well-being of Indigenous people. Most people alive today have no concept of the abundance and diversity of life that has been lost. Filmmaker and entomologist Steve Nichols gives an enlightening, though depressing, accounting of that in this book, Paradise Found: Nature in North America at the Time of Discovery. 80% of Canada's people live in urban environments. and we are all living in the urban era, meaning the influence of urban culture is ubiquitous. This does not mean a physical separation of people and trees necessarily. It does imply a psychological separation from nature that results in a simplification of environments and the associated use and accommodation of trees, with a corresponding loss of ecological complexity, diversity, and resilience. It also means a lack of awareness and understanding of human-environment interaction and interconnectedness with nature. And related to that, our dependence on nature for our health and well-being. This is a case of forgetting, stemming from ideas of progress that imagine us transcending the concrete reality of being in the world. Fortunately, urban policymakers, as well as planners and designers, are increasingly attentive to the relationship of culture and nature, thanks to the reinterpretation of the 1970s idea, limits to growth, as the idea of sustainability presented in this publication. Sustainability describes a relationship between concrete reality and culture, characterized by a sense of responsibility for human action as it impacts others and nature. The ecological, economic, and social dimension of a place are considered for the purpose of imagining appropriate, balanced, resilient outcomes to urban evolution. Trees are just one element within the complex, dynamic reality of an urban environment or ecosystem. Nevertheless, to create the environmental conditions for healthy trees is to create a healthy environment for people, and vice versa. It is not hard to create such environments in one sense. It has been done throughout history in parks and gardens, first for the ruling elite, and since the mid-19th century for the general public. To improve upon this legacy requires urban design and planning based on ecological thinking and doing. That, in turn, has implications for education. A citizenry attuned to sustainability as a general value and principle for urban living and should expect more of their politicians and civil servants when it comes to the physical quality of their communities. One's lived experience of a city should be life-affirming. Physical beauty, or a sense of harmony often associated with trees, is critical to a positive sense of place, yet is rarely announced or upheld as a fundamental goal to be achieved in city building. We speak of connectedness within a community as an important ecological reality for trees and people. But that would probably be understood and provided for more widely now as pertaining to digital technologies, rather than the quality of physical space. Trees are not a panacea for better urban living, but when well provided for, they are a critical element in improving urban life. Consider Lucca, Italy. Lucca is a Tuscan city dating back to 180 BCE. The streets follow a Roman grid, giving the place a more contemporary feel as compared to medieval settlements with their organic street layouts. The city's most distinctive physical feature is its well-preserved Renaissance defensive walls distinguished by tree-lined ramparts. The walls are a remarkable cultural feature with significant social, economic, ecological, and aesthetic value. Undoubtedly, the trees on the walls are essential to Lucca's genius loci, or sense of place. Multi-age trees on the walls are essential to suggest a long-term planned commitment to maintaining trees as an essential element of the walls in particular and the city generally. The quality of life and positive sense of place in Lucca is all the better for that. Curitiba, Brazil, founded in 1693, is another city in which the value of trees to urban living has been realized and acted upon. In the 1970s and 80s, under the leadership of architect, planner, and mayor Jamie Lerner, Curitiba was transformed through ecologically based urban design and the associated establishment of a now renowned public transit system, then innovative green infrastructure and waste management, an extensive public park system, doubling as stormwater management, and that's what you see here, neighborhood-based libraries, and the planting of over 1 million trees. Lerner regards the planting of trees as true urban courtesy. He engaged the public in a tree's welfare by asking for help irrigating trees planted in the public realm. The campaign slogan for this initiative was, "City Hall provides the shade, and you provide the water." Trees were used to unify the otherwise diverse areas related to demographics. Regardless of income level, citizens were asked to choose a fruit tree for their gardens. To further demonstrate the value of trees, the layout of new streets had to avoid existing streets.
Sorry about that.
Kind of went with it, didn't you think? Curitiba means pine wood, from the local native language for pine nut, tree, and many. This refers to the Brazilian pine, Araucaria angustifolia. In Curitiba's core, a public park has a raised glass surface around a historically significant Araucaria to protect it while still accommodating people's use of the park. Black and white marble block paving, for which Rio de Janeiro is known, is notable in Curitiba for the stylized Araucaria pattern in contrasting black marble. A public building celebrating Curitiba's civic life features a sculpture of Araucaria cones. Such planning and care for trees is in Curitiba indicative of enlightened public policy. London, Ontario, great intro, I think, to London, Ontario, don't you? Is characterized as the forest city. Anyone from London? Cindy and I are from London. Its so-called urban forest canopy is made up of 4.4 million trees, creating 23% coverage currently. The goal is 28% coverage by 2035 and 34% by 2065. To achieve this, the city issued the Million Tree Challenge in 2011, with the objective of planting over 1 million trees in 10 years. Jamie Lerner did it in far less time in Curitiba. It's a quarter of the way there in 5. I served on the city's tree committee for a year, then left that for the Urban Design Peer Review Committee. While the former, that is the tree committee, was focused on trees as urban forest, the Urban Design Peer Review Committee was addressing the use and treatment of trees in land development and in the city's wider urban design activity. This is more about seeing the city for the trees rather than city trees as a forest. The assumption here is that trees are critical components of urban ecosystems. There may be urban forests, such as those of Toronto's or Owen Sound's river valleys, within an urban ecosystem. But to characterize all trees within a city as part of an urban forest is an ecological misnomer. Tree island biogeography or tree patch and corridor system are more accurate models for urban tree systems. Nevertheless, the characterization of urban trees as a forest has historical resonance and ecological connotations, resulting in systems, comprehensive or integrated thinking and action with respect to urban trees. Forestry departments have become much more involved in city planning, especially new development or redevelopment projects. Such projects are subject to extensive policy review within municipalities. As well as the involvement of forestry departments, civil engineering departments attend to infrastructure, transportation departments to roads and transit primarily, planning departments oversee official plans, associated land use and social goals, urban design departments promote and uphold sustainability as expressed through physical design, parks departments attend to green spaces, and economics departments look for ways to sustain a city's growth minimally and expand it preferably. Politicians are accountable to citizens for land development projects approved or not. Within this group of decision makers worldwide, the value of trees within an urban environment is known. What varies is how that understanding is put into practice, as Lucca and Curitiba and London demonstrate. The City of London established its urban design peer review panel in 2008 in conjunction with the hiring of an urban designer. I served on that panel with 5 other design professionals and more recently, in this year, as its chair. These are the projects that we were responsible for reviewing. Our mandate was to provide a peer review of the design of any substantive development project that required an official plan or zoning amendment for implementation, though we were also asked to review any project put before us by the city urban design department. Official plans require a percentage of development site area to be green space. The quality of that green space can vary considerably, but usually green space is associated with trees. That's good and bad. Good when conditions supportive of tree growth are provided, bad when not. Related to that, there may be a concern for quantity of trees at the expense of practicality. Parking lots are often the focus of such concern, and as such are indicative of a lack of respect for trees as living beings. Coincidentally, parking lots also reveal our ecological, social, and economic priorities. Our reliance on cars aside, parking lots are for them. Rarely are they designed for us, by which I mean, rarely do they provide a good, safe, pedestrian experience from car to building. One way we do try to humanize parking lots is by providing little islands of green, and in many cases, that means a location for a tree. Unfortunately, most parking islands cannot accommodate a mature tree. In my work as a landscape architect, and considering the numerous parking lots I have worked on, I have only ever designed 2 parking lots that could accommodate trees adequately. One was at a golf course parking lot in Coquitlam, BC. The other was for a botanical garden in Malaysia. Both places were the quality of human experience was an economic imperative, and that justified lots of trees and sufficient space. The golf course was to convey a sense of exclusivity, so its parking lot could not look like that of a shopping mall. The experience of a botanical garden was to be just that, whether in the parking lot or one of the theme gardens. Landscape architects are rarely hired to design parking lots in Canada. That task falls to civil engineers. Their motivation is not your aesthetic experience. Vehicle function and stormwater management is. The latter is actually especially important given the quantity of impermeable surface in parking lots. Interestingly, it is simple, well-known topographic techniques for surface water management that brings landscape architects and civil engineers together to deal with stormwater management in parking lots and other projects with extensive impermeable surface. What you may think of as a ditch is now referred to as a bioswale. Great term. Depressions, called rain gardens, are created to collect and hold water for infiltration. Bioswales and rain gardens may replace traditional islands in parking lots. That's actually a good thing. For example, and provided they contain adequate soil volume, they are meant to support tree growth, assuming, of course, the correct choice of tree for such conditions. Landscape architects have adopted the language of civil engineering and call such landscape features green infrastructure. This appeals to civil engineers and also infrastructure funding agencies. The attraction for decision makers is the opportunity to manage surface water in a more environmentally friendly, economical, and aesthetically pleasing manner. The inclusion of trees in the concept of green infrastructure is significant for urban planning, design, and engineering. Not to hold civil engineers up as villains in this story. Any civil engineers in the audience? Excellent. But the standards they've developed and implemented for urban infrastructure have had a negative influence on trees in urban environments. Those large mature trees in the old parts of many cities have survived because past civil engineering standards and methods were not as stringent as those applied today. For example, sewage and stormwater may not have been separated as is now required, and it was often flowing through leaky pipes. That benefited trees with nutrient-rich irrigation. When such infrastructure is replaced to current standards, existing trees, such as you see here, will suffer through the impact of construction on root areas, higher compaction levels, restricting water infiltration and root growth, and the loss of nutrients and moisture. Fortunately, there have been some excellent accommodations made for trees in infrastructure renewal, a new installation because of the green infrastructure idea. These accommodations are based on an understanding of the conditions actually required for a tree to thrive. The will and decisions to apply these systems is related to our environmental awareness and increasing concern for sustainability generally, and more particularly, sound evidence of the value of trees in urban environments. Structural soil, for example, is a simple solution to the often competing desire or need to sustain a tree and support a surface requiring dense structural support such as asphalt or concrete of a road or sidewalk. Structural soil is a structural planting medium. Conventional planting soil could be structural, but would require such compaction that it would no longer support tree growth. The key to structural soil is using an aggregate that will compact while leaving enough voids for roots and the soil, air, and moisture they require. The key to mixing the soil and aggregate is a binding agent that stops the soil settling into the voids in the aggregate during placement and mechanical compaction. Here you see trees growing similarly in a native soil area on the right and a paved area supported by structural soil on the left. And those trees were planted at the same time. It has been common in the use of urban trees in hard surface areas to treat each tree autonomously. Single tree pit. Now, the better practice is simply to provide enough soil volume to actually support a mature tree. That may be an autonomous tree pit, but increasingly, continuous planting areas extending under hard surfaces are being created. The hard surface is supported by structural soil or a manufactured structural cell system, such as you see here, and this one is called civil cells. James Urban, a landscape architect, instrumental in the research-based development of these cells, is noted for alerting his fellow landscape architects and allied professionals to the failings of conventional tree use in urban environments. Not only do his methods and technologies support healthy tree growth, they contribute to stormwater management either through infiltration, retention, or filtration. This is a sort of value-added benefit that led to the characterization of trees as green infrastructure, and not just optional aesthetic elements in the way of conventional infrastructure. The green infrastructure label for trees is further advocated because of their positive effects on urban conditions. And you heard a lot about this last week, for example. And here you can see climate and air as one of the primary benefits of greater use of trees. The management of stormwater in an urban environment is obviously very important. And as with the delivery of electricity, trees are expendable when in the way, seemingly, of such vital infrastructure. Burying power lines to avoid or provide for trees does have a premium cost in the short term. The benefit is over the long term, as with any use of trees in the urban environment. At York University, there's a stormwater management pond in the campus arboretum. The pond received the majority of the campus stormwater runoff before its release into Black Creek system. In 2006, a mixed-use land use plan for underutilized campus land was proposed for the university in conjunction with the extension of the Spadina subway line through the York campus to Vaughan. In support of the land use plan, civil engineers determined the need to expand and improve the pond. York was already under pressure to improve campus water management, and that focused on the pond in particular after a 2005 Black Creek flood undermined and washed out part of Finch Avenue. Anybody remember that? Yeah. Unfortunately, an expanded pond, based on the engineer's proposal, meant the destruction of the arboretum. I was the campus planner at the time, and there was no way I wanted to be associated with the loss of the arboretum. The solution I proposed was to improve the existing pond and build another pond where it wouldn't require the destruction of trees. The civil engineer didn't want to destroy the arboretum, but the way he approached the problem restricted his solutions. Existing pond, expand the existing pond. Right? Trees were neither his primary consideration, nor, frankly, were they mine. However, my approach to campus planning was more holistic, with a goal of maintaining and expanding tree cover whenever possible. Students, especially, were supportive of that goal, as was York's Environmental Studies faculty and the Institute for Research and Innovation in Sustainability. So I had a lot of backing for suggesting we do something different. And students have an incredible amount of power. Some of you may know that. Sustainability is an important principle to have gained prominence in design and planning. It denotes a comprehensive way of thinking characterized usually by the three environmental dimensions that I've noted previously: ecological, economic, and social dimensions. I add the aesthetic dimension to that, though frankly we could just speak of two: nature and culture. Sustainability as a way of thinking and motivation for action has been instrumental in improving the lot of urban trees, because it requires that a tree, or any other element for that matter, be considered ecologically, economically, socially, and aesthetically. The ecological benefit of trees is well known. Building on their ecological utility and conceiving of trees as green infrastructure has heightened their economic status while also reinforcing the aesthetic appreciation of trees. Do any of you know where this building is? There's a lot of things going on in the United States at this moment in this building, I guess trying to decide the future of the political process in that country. So this is Trump Tower. And I took this picture long before Mr. Trump ever ran for office, and despite what we may think of that outcome, it's a gorgeous building, and it's the fact that these trees are sort of halfway up this building is quite a remarkable thing. I don't think he had anything to do with the design, frankly. So what is emerging is a greater understanding of the social aspects of trees as it relates to the quality of urban life. For example, there is a correlation between quantity of trees in a neighborhood, and we heard this last week, and area demographics. Lower income areas tend to have fewer trees than higher income areas. Trees do contribute positively to environmental health and thus human health. Trees on a child's walk to school, and in a school property especially, are beneficial to children's general health. Complex environments stimulate imagination and creativity. Too many school grounds were built more for the ease of maintenance than educational value. Though there is a movement toward creating more ecologically diverse school grounds, money for new school construction is still dedicated primarily to the building, with little left for the grounds. In such formative years, time spent by children in beautiful, stimulating exterior environments regarded as essential to their education could have a lasting beneficial influence on their environmental literacy, not to mention their general health. Every school ground could be a classroom for both passive and active learning and socializing. This is applicable to all educational institutions. You're not supposed to read this whole slide. At the University of British Columbia, for example, I advocated through a landscape master plan the university landscape not just as a place of learning, but as a place for learning. The goal was to provide opportunity for people to both share their knowledge of UBC's landscape and learn from the experience of others about the landscape around them. That included the trees, of course. I became the University of British Columbia's resident landscape architect, urban designer in 1998. While there, I came to know the campus trees very well. As with so many universities, UBC's landscape defines the place. And built elements aside, the trees are an obvious feature, contributing to the university's positive sense of place. The UBC campus supports the population of a small city over 405 hectares. It's surrounded by second growth forest. And when I was at UBC, 7,078 trees, apart from those significant groves and forested areas, were documented. 70% of the trees were deciduous, 30% coniferous, 14% native species, 86% non-native species. Now this excludes those forested areas which were mostly native species. 18% of the trees were acers, maples, 12% prunus, and an awful lot of those were Japanese flowering cherries, which were what you saw in that one image of the beautiful trees in bloom. And then 10% quercus, or oak trees. This knowledge informed decisions about tree management and specification, especially with respect to the use of native trees. The main mall, the central axis through the campus, was once two vehicle lanes divided by a median along a topographic spine. It's now a pedestrian mall. It was and is distinguished by an avenue of mature red oaks. The oaks were planted as saplings in the early 1930s. In the language of urban design today, they would be characterized as street trees because of their association with and proximity to the main mall. Unlike so many street trees today, the main mall oaks thrive. It's only in the last 20 years that there has been a systematic removal and replacement of the oaks due to their decline resulting from age, stress, and disease. Certainly an oak tree will live longer than 70 years. However, that is a respectable age for a tree in a monocultural urban situation, as has been the norm for street trees. Now greater attention is paid to a diversity of species within the public realm. Unfortunately, in many urban situations, trees cannot realize their potential and often die due to poor choice of tree, neglect, insufficient soil, water and oxygen, and stressful urban conditions. The UBC oaks thrived for two reasons in particular. They were planted as saplings, and they had sufficient soil, volume, and water. And in this case, water was critical because there is actually a drought period in the lower mainland in the summers. Tree size at planting is a critical factor in tree survival. The larger the tree, the longer it takes to establish itself in a new environment. Plant a 5 centimeter caliper tree at the same time and in similar conditions as a 15 centimeter caliper tree, and usually the smaller tree will catch up to the larger tree in a few years, while the larger tree remains relatively static as it recovers from the shock of being moved. Of course, it is possible to move mature trees and have them survive. And in this case, that was moved, and these are the smaller trees. But the cost and care to move big trees is more often than not prohibitive. An exception to this is the redesign and replanting of Goderich Town Square following the 2011 tornado that decimated the town's mature trees, and in particular, Courthouse Square Park, noted for such trees. Planning Partnership, a Toronto landscape architecture and planning firm, were hired by Goderich to rebuild Courthouse Square and improve the surrounding areas. They implemented an ecological plan based on soil quality, plant succession, and biodiversity. The goal was a more immediate sense of tree canopy using fast-growing, opportunistic species such as Liriodendron tulipifera, tulip tree, reinforced over a longer period by slow-growing species such as Quercus rubra, or red oaks. Critical to the success of any tree is the quality of soil. The Goderich project as with most urban projects, required soil amendment for the specified trees to thrive. Bulk density of soil is a ratio of solid to pore space. Healthy soil is half bulk and half voids for water, air, and other chemicals and nutrients. Thus the specifications for structural soil. So many trees used in street trees and land development projects don't thrive because their environment is compromised by poor soil quality and insufficient soil volume. Consider the space given over to this street tree. Healthy tree roots are equal to or greater than the canopy. So if tree roots are restricted, canopy growth will be compromised. The Goderich project was distinguished by the size of trees and how they were transplanted. Digging and balling of burlapping trees, as you see here by hand, is the best practice for transplanting trees. It can be cost prohibitive compared to machine spading and the use of wire baskets to contain a root mass. These pictures of trees used in Goderich give us a sense of a minimal volume required to support a tree. A younger tree will have a smaller root ball. However, while a small root ball may fit a confined space, as may be provided, there is too often little volume for healthy root growth. As a result, the tree may live for a time, though as with any potted plant, will decline and die without proper soil volume and care. The standards for infrastructure construction are a factor in tree planting and survival. Impermeable or impervious surfaces, compaction, and compatibility are the three reasons for the exclusion of trees from new development, and when included, their lack of success. Impermeable surfaces are also critical factors in surface or stormwater management. In relation to trees and ecosystems, impermeable surfaces mean a lack of water infiltration. A 2-meter wide boulevard meant to support street trees contained by a roadway and concrete sidewalk receives an insufficient quantity of rain from most desirable tree species. Not only that, the quantity and quality of soil for the tree may be insufficient. The tree may also be compromised by the compacted materials used to support the roadway and sidewalk. As well, there may be other services such as water, sewer, gas, and communications sharing the boulevard, and no service provider likes trees in the way of their services. Consider what electricity providers may do to trees that are seen to be in the way of poles and power lines, whether in urban or rural areas. One reason trees are not planted on rural roads is because it's easier to maintain power lines without trees in the way. Greenfield or sprawl development may solve this problem by burying power lines within the public right-of-way. That's a good solution for trees, and also for the aesthetic quality of the place, be that as it may. It does require significant coordination, design, and construction, and thus cost of trees is to be accommodated within the public right-of-way. The construction standards are critical in this situation for the installation, let alone the survival, of street trees, given the three factors mentioned: impermeable surface, compaction, and conflict with services. Just taking into account service features such as subdivision driveways, for example, results in more limited opportunities for street trees than may be expected or wanted. The result is a diminishment of urban tree canopy. In the older areas of our towns and cities, we are enjoying the legacy and foresight of our late 19th and early 20th century ancestors. A legacy that is disappearing as trees enjoyed over lifetimes are declining and being removed throughout Ontario, and not just in cities. The large deciduous trees creating distinctive avenues along rural roads are disappearing. That such trees die is expected. The cultural irresponsibility is the lack of tree succession, plans to maintain what we had at the very least. This is meant to be upside down. Canadian artist Rodney Graham has explored our relationship with trees in his work. He is critical of the way trees are used as design elements in urban environments. In celebration of the recent millennium, the Duncan Art Gallery at UBC secured a Canada Council grant for a work by Graham called Millennial Project for an Urban Plaza. Graham proposed, as you see here, an elevated camera obscura large enough for a person to enter to view a featured tree projected by daylight through a lens onto the opposite surface. Graham's work was a critique of the way we conceive of, use, and celebrate trees, both as singular and regimented aesthetic elements in urban environments, while at the same time clear-cutting ex-urban forests throughout BC. He proposed the thinning yellow camera, the color of machines used in commercial forestry, be placed within a plaza with a tree planted at some distance away within the camera's field of view. An inverted and ever-changing image of the tree would be projected into the camera, where it could be viewed. This seemed appropriate for the university landscape as a learning landscape. And UBC's main mall was the perfect setting, I thought, for the art. I was already working on a plaza at one end of the main mall, so I incorporated the Graham piece. Coincidentally, and fittingly in my mind, the plaza was outside the forestry building, a faculty that received significant funding from the BC forestry industry. As you may surmise, the art was rejected in that location, given its concept. What was disheartening for me and the fine arts faculty involved with the project with respect to Graham's piece, aesthetics aside, was the intolerance for legitimate criticism of forestry practices within an academic environment. Clear-cutting is an economic imperative. It is ecologically and aesthetically indefensible and culturally irresponsible with respect to native land claims. My professional colleagues also rejected the art because it could not meet building code requirements for a place of assembly as presented by the artist, though I had actually resolved that problem through its placement in the proposed plaza. Though by no means as significant, critical, or quite frankly controversial a piece, I did cite a reconceived, artistically less controversial Graham camera obscura within the campus, and I planted a tree accordingly. In this case, the Sequoiadendron giganteum, or giant redwood. It's going to be there for a while. Yeah, that's the view from inside that little carriage. And there is the young Sequoiadendron giganteum. We landscape architects are by no means blameless in our use and abuse of trees, as highlighted by Graham's critical observation. Coincidentally, one of my peers was disciplined by our professional society for specifying Sequoiadendron giganteum in inappropriate locations repeatedly. Sounds a little, oh my. It was his signature tree, and he specified it for sites regardless of context. Context is everything for trees, urban and otherwise. Context is everything for any planning and design question. Consider the Twin Towers Memorial. It is the result, first, of the destruction of Manhattan's World Trade Center towers on September 11th, 2001. And second, the associated international design competition. Trees figured prominently in many of the 5,201 entries, as is to be expected. I specified a grove of Nyssa sylvatica, black gum or tupelo, in my competition design, for example. We use trees to memorialize and commemorate people, places, and events because they symbolize life and longevity. And as with my suggested use, because they humanize and temporally ground a space. The initial entry by New York architect and semi-finalist Michael Arad was distinguished by a lack of trees. While his design concept was favored, the proposed physical design was described as barren and inhospitable. At the insistence of the competition jury, Arad teamed with renowned U.S. landscape architect Peter Walker. Walker had submitted an unsuccessful entry, as you see here. The Arad-Walker pairing, however, resulted in the memorial design winning competition entry. Walker's influence is most notable in the design of the site as a memorial tree grove, within which the tower footprints become sacred wells symbolic of loss. The result at street level is a visually legible, humane, park-like memorial compared to the barren, austere plaza expanse distinguished by absence of Arad's original concept. The absence, so critical to the memorial's meaning, is created in the contrast of water feature wells or voids within a grove of trees within New York's dense, high-rise financial district. We fail culturally, that is ecologically, economically, socially, and aesthetically, in neglecting trees or nature. That's what barren and inhospitable means. That's how I would describe the Owen Sound Hospital parking lot and that of Grey Roots Museum and Archives. These are two of the public places that my landscape design students reimagined as part of the Extraordinary Tree program in cooperation with Grey Roots Health Services and Grey Roots Museum and Archives. They began in the fall of 2014 with the idea that green space in a healthcare environment, when used programmatically, enhances therapeutic outcomes for patients while also benefiting their healthcare providers and visitors. As with the concept of a university campus being a landscape for learning, the whole hospital landscape could be regarded as a therapeutic landscape. For many, that experience would start in a hospital parking lot. A facility that need not be barren and inhospitable. In other words, contrary to the idea of a hospital. They analyzed and then redesigned as therapeutic landscapes the 5 smaller Grey Bruce Health Services hospitals in Markdale, Southampton, Meaford, Briarton. And Lion's Head. If any of you have been to Lion's Head Hospital, you may wonder, like, what's with this? But that's actually a really significant landscape feature, is this slope at that small hospital area. So, it had to be dealt with. In the winter 2015 term, so same group of students, divided up in the first case, looking at the 5 hospitals, but given the scale of the Owen Sound Hospital, they all worked on that project, though I've only put a few of them in here. So the design focus was the whole of the Owen Sound Hospital. Now, trees do have therapeutic value, and last week you heard a fair bit about that. And interestingly, whether experienced in actuality or as a picture, I think that's quite remarkable. So in all these cases, I'm showing you 2 of the panels. There's a third panel that was really just an analysis of the site as is. So you saw what they thought it could be, and then these are what we call their visualizations, when prior to digital would have been hand perspectives of what is being imagined for these places. So I hope you see the prominence of trees in these ideas that they're presenting. This particular space is completely devoid of anything other than turf at this point. Yeah, it's a sad space. So there was talk last week with respect to that idea of even a picture of a tree having therapeutic value, and talk about the idea of biophilia or love of nature. And I would suggest, yes, it is absolutely related to biophilia, but biophilia is an intellectualized idea of that love of nature. The connection to trees that people actually have is primordial. So last fall, we looked at the hospital sites, and then last fall we looked at the site outside here. And they reimagined the entrance area from the road to the front door. And additionally, we had to add something to that. The students were to suggest a landscape installation that had the county as a focus, so the landscape of the county and trees, of course. And we used the term treehouse to describe that, and just left it to their imaginations as to what that would actually mean. So this treehouse, for example, and this is a model of that, little maquette. And Stephen would know all about making models of potential art pieces. This referenced a native story of a birch tree planted on the grave of an elder, and then the birch tree grew. And so the students had this idea of planting a birch tree, but then in where that tree was planted would be this cube of steel and fencing, so symbolic of the settlement of Grey and Bruce counties, and what the technology that we essentially brought to the area, and how this tree, sort of more symbolic of nature and indigenous peoples, would sort of grow up and between and blend these two ideas. And then this one was again just looking at the idea of trees and history, and using cedar rails to create a house, essentially, within which the tree was confined and would grow. In the same way that, frankly, a lot of our ideas are an attempt to confine and manage nature. So Grey Roots Museum and Archives is a cultural facility within a cultural landscape. So in one sense, it's a parking lot is a fitting reflection of contemporary parking lot design. Yeah. It would be more valuable culturally and thus educationally, however, for the museum's landscape design to express its cultural landscape context more eloquently, sustainably, and beautifully through the use of trees in particular. A small step in this regard, just last month, the senior landscape design students installed a symbolic garden in the parking lot island in front of the museum. The cultural landscape is referenced in the shape and planting of the installation based on the quartered circle symbol that you see here, used by North America's indigenous peoples. The symbol represents the seasons by color, associative values, and 4 sacred plants: black and sage for autumn, white and sweetgrass for winter, yellow and tobacco for spring, and for summer, red, and Athuyiox and Nentalis, white cedar or tree of life, so important to indigenous peoples and Grey Bruce settlers alike. It's obvious that people regard trees variously. Some think of them as extraordinary. Some see history. Some hear their stories. For some, a tree is firewood or board feet. For others, trees are essential to ecosystem and thus human health. Still others think it nothing to cut down a tree because it's messy. The way one regards trees relates to one's culture and lived experience. It may also indicate a respect for, a sense of responsibility toward, and knowledge of nature more generally. This nature is concrete reality that the philosopher Erzim Koach calls our primordially given cosmic context. It is our home, or oikos, Earth. Historically, our lived experience told us our place would provide for us. We've done well as a species by this reality. However, there is now a general realization that Earth or nature can be influenced on a planetary scale by human action to our detriment and that of other life forms it supports. The current geological epoch is being called the Anthropocene accordingly. Anthro being Latin for human. A label in itself is of little consequence. What is significant is the truth of our experience. The earth can provide for life, but there are profound consequences when ecosystems are disrupted. While scientist James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis may be correct in conceiving of Earth as a self-regulating system, the planet's survival is not related to human survival. It appears we better start remembering the reality of our natural heritage. Awareness implicates knowledge and understanding. To speak of awareness, intelligence, knowledge, and understanding is to speak of experience and history. Human experience is about being in nature and becoming in culture. Human action is influenced by the associated awareness of oneself and others, both human and non-human, in relation to nature and culture. We categorize history in relation to revolutionary social, economic, and technological change, the Industrial Revolution, for example. We are living in an urban revolution, characterized by the separation of responsibility from actions in nature and the associated consequences for nature and thus people. This is manifested most notably in the psychological separation of people and nature, as well as our nicheless ecological state. Unlike other creatures, we are able to transcend environmental limitations or limits to growth through our technologies. A characteristic of the Industrial Revolution was to think of cities and people as machines. That is our legacy, and the environmental, economic, social, and psychological costs of this way of thinking and acting, coupled with the majority of the world's population living in cities, are becoming clear in climate change, the degradation and cost of conventional infrastructure, and threats to human well-being or quality of life, such as poverty and homelessness. Being in the world is a differentiated experience. Optimally, this is the experience resulting from the synthesis of being in nature and becoming in culture. Unfortunately, awareness, understanding, thought, and action guiding decision-making has too often been conflicted, polarizing us as for nature or having primacy over nature. Neither so simplistic nor dualistic, human experience is instead defined by the primal understanding of human vulnerability, insignificance, and mortality in primordial nature, inextricably coupled with self-awareness as expressed by 17th century mathematician and philosopher René Descartes, the first to have published his revelation of himself in his own thought, and in keeping with that seemingly unique human trait and associated scientific merit, reinforced the potential for mastery and possession of nature by humankind. What a dilemma and conceit. We distort Descartes' legacy in discounting our non-human life, such as that of a tree, or our intended technologically driven denial of our being in nature, and thus our dependence on very particular qualities of nature. This is nihilistic. What we have to strive to achieve is thought and action that results in balance, harmony, diversity, resilience, or sustainability. Our action has to be ecological as well as economic. There is no alternative to the city in our civilization. Our world is an urban world and will only become more urbanized. There have always been and will always be ecological, social, economic, and physical design and planning problems related to urban living. Trees are absolutely critical to our well-being and that of the planet, as we need it to be for ourselves and other species. We can create cities conducive to trees more truly as part of an urban ecosystem. There is no excuse and limited time for not acting accordingly. We know enough to create appropriate environments for life to thrive, be it that of a tree or a person. We have to transcend the nihilism that characterizes our collective way of being in nature and becoming in culture. Lived experience of nature and attending to history is fundamental to that. Sustainability as a theory and practice inspired by the wonder of nature and tempered by humility in our ability to destroy it for life as we know it is a step in the right direction culturally. Sustainability will always represent a challenge and an opportunity to think and act respectfully and responsibly for our sake, the sake of extraordinary trees, and all other life with which we share this beautiful, extraordinary planet. Thank you very much.